Hey, ghoul friend. It's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I want to ask you to wish Susto a happy birthday. As we celebrate the upcoming 5th anniversary of Susto and its dedication to exploring the rich tapestry of Latin American and Hispanic folklore, I invite you to join me in taking this paranormal project to the next level. Over the past 5 years, I've delved deep into the mysterious realms of ghostly apparitions, supernatural legends, and chilling tales that have captivated audiences worldwide. Now, as I embark on the next chapter of this journey into the unknown, I need your support to enhance your experience as a listener. Your generous donation will allow me to invest in a new recording setup, ensuring that future spine-chilling narratives are captured with crystal ball clarity and devilish detail. With upgraded equipment, I'll be able to host ghoulish guests with greater ease and transport you even deeper into the heart of darkness, where legends come alive and the paranormal awaits. Every dollar contributed will aid in advancing the quality of Susto, enabling me to continue preserving and sharing the enchanting folklore of Latin American and Hispanic cultures with the world. Join me in celebrating 5 years of fear-inducing tales and help me amplify this spooky saga for many more to come. Together, we can unlock the secrets of the supernatural and keep the spirit of storytelling alive. To make a donation, you can visit gofund.me/10bcdc27. Thank you for your support, and may the spirits guide you on your journey through the unknown. Eternally yours, Adrian or Ayden. Either way. Hey, ghoul friends. It's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to or watching Susto, the podcast of ooky, spooky, scary stories. Ghoul friends, welcome back. That is right. This is another video episode of Susto, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry for doing 2 back-to-back interview episodes. I was just so extremely excited for today's episode. You have already seen in the title. If you are a best ghoul friend on Patreon, then you already saw the sneak peek over on patreon.com/Susto podcast. Today on Susto, we have Isabel Cañas, the author of The Hacienda and Vampires of el Norte, among many other pieces. Isabel is an amazing writer. She was also an amazing guest. I'm so excited. Oh my God, I feel like it's the first, and I think I said this to Isabel off recording. This felt like the first kind of, no disrespect to anybody, but this felt like meeting a celebrity to me, just because I read her first book, The Hacienda, many months ago. I was on a Spooky Tales to do a book review on that. So if you haven't listened to that episode, make sure to go to listen to theirs, because that was such a fun episode to do. And then when I heard or saw rather that Isabel was releasing a second novel, I knew immediately that I wanted to read it. And then I found her online presence and I was like, wow, she's a ghoulie. Like, she is a ghoul. I knew that like we were going to get along, and you will see or hear it on today's episode. Isabel was just a phenomenal time to be around, and I'm so excited for all the work that not only she has already created, but that she will create in the future. Before we move on, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the organizers and the hosts of the BIPOC Latinx Pop Media Symposium that I was at last week. It was so much fun to be around other creatives, to meet people in the community. Again, you all know how much I love meeting you all IRL. So if you were there, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you for swinging by. I truly appreciate it. And I need to think of something to do. I think I'm going to implement some sort of discount on my merch table for the people who show up to these events and say, hey, yeah, I listened to your show, or I'm a Patreon subscriber, as a thank you for going the extra mile. And not even if it's just for me, just showing up in person to these kinds of events. It means a lot to all types of creators. So again, thank you to everybody who showed up and who attended my workshop. I had such a fun time. I felt my Professor kind of oats. If you are watching on Patreon, I'll put in some clips or pictures over this. But yeah, it was such a great time. Up next, I think the next event that I have coming up in person is the Curious Twins at the Black Swan Inn. They are hosting a Psychic and Spirit Festival. I believe that is May 17th and 18th. Again, the link to get your tickets is on my link tree. I will throw that up on the website too. But again, if you go visit my link tree that has all the links listed, it should be the top option there, and you can get a ticket for that. And I'll also be doing the VIP paranormal investigation the evening before the actual festival. So excited to go and do that again. Curious Twins, I've been to one of their events. I've tabled at one of their events, and they are such gracious, generous hosts. This next one I will be tabling and also presenting at. So very excited for that. That's about all the updates for today. As always, if you have your own scary stories that you would like me to read on a Letters from the Beyond episode or share on social media, because it can also be photo, video, audio recording, whatever you think should be shared online. You already know how to do that. Send it in a DM via social medias. That's at Susto Podcast on every social media platform. Email it to sustopodcast@gmail.com. Hit the contact button on sustopodcast.com. Leave it in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or in the Q&A on Spotify. And shout out, thank you so much to the people that are filling out and interacting with the show. If you're listening on Spotify, filling out that Q&A box and answering the questions that I'm either posing on the podcast itself or in as the prompt for the Q&A. Feel free to use that to send me whatever you want. I love hearing from you all. And I got really great feedback about the paranormal news segment that I'm going to be introducing to the standard episodes. So one more time, thank you all so much for doing that. I love hearing from you. I truly take it into consideration and I really appreciate it. So with all of that being said, I'm going to read her bio really quickly, although she will introduce herself shortly. I just want to read this from her website, and you can find all the links to follow Isabel online in the description of this video or episode, wherever you are watching or listening. And this says, Isabel Cañas is a Mexican-American speculative fiction writer. After having lived in Mexico, Scotland, Egypt, Turkey, and New York City, among other places, she has settled in the Pacific Northwest. She holds a doctorate in Near Eastern languages and civilizations and writes fiction inspired by her research and her heritage. Again, so excited. Please welcome to the pod, Isabel Cañas.
Hey, what's up? I'm Charlie.
And I'm Tyler.
And we are Believing the Bizarre,
a paranormal podcast that dives into the unknown and the unusual every Tuesday.
We discuss hauntings, cryptids, aliens, UFO encounters, conspiracies, and more.
And we break down whether or not we find them believable.
All right, listen, if you're not paying for electricity, you're not paying for dinner.
Saw a terrifying looking face pressed to the window with gaping eyes.
Almost reached it when the laughter stopped suddenly, and a sound behind me made me turn around.
Sorry, I was gonna do it, but then I had SpaceX.
So we got you covered, whether you like horror or laughs, or both. We actually really hope it's both.
With over 3 million downloads, you'll be joining a bizarro community that we promise is more than just Mothman and our parents.
We even take creepy stories from our listeners and turn them into episodes.
Check out Believing the Bizarre on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Believing the Bizarre, a podcast as bizarre as you are.
Hey, ghoul friends. So very, very excited to have our guest here today. You already heard in the intro and saw in the title. And if you are following me online, you have seen me just absolutely losing my mind over Dr. Isabel Cañas. Thank you so much for being here. I mean, I couldn't do it justice. So could you please introduce yourself to the people?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I was so thrilled when you reached out because, like I said, I'm just a fan of the pod, you know. I'm Isabel Cañas. I am a speculative fiction writer, which is, I guess, my sly way of saying I really like genre fiction, and I love all shades of it, and I can't stop myself from writing it. And my novels are The Hacienda and Vampires of El Norte, which was a USA Today bestseller and is available for purchase wherever fine books are sold. And I have some more stuff coming out the pipe, not this year, but in 2025. And that's pretty much all I can say about that. But yeah, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I have a very, very demanding Aries daughter, and I'm just trying to get by and write the next draft.
Yeah, I mean those Aries, they will get you. What's your sign?
I'm a Scorpio. I am Scorpio
okay.
all the way down the charts.
That water fire combo.
Yeah, it's she was due in Taurus season, and my sister is a Taurus, and she and I get along like a house on fire, and I was so ready for that like sweet situation, and she arrived 2 weeks early, and she is who she is, and I love her, but man, it's fun.
I bet. Well, so this wasn't in the prepared questions because I hadn't finished reading Vampires of El Norte yet. But I read it from cover to cover, meaning I read the author's notes, and you saw my TikTok. And if you all haven't seen it, go watch it again. I cried in it because it was so beautifully written and I felt so seen. And I feel like anybody who listens to Susto and kind of gets the idea of it and the feeling that I'm trying to emulate with the show is going to love that author's note. But you do mention the Rio Grande Valley. So I'm curious to your ties to the valley because I am from 956. So
nice. Yeah, my mom was born in San Benito and she was raised in Harlingen. She calls it the one horse town where even the horse left.
Oh no.
She moved to Chicago when she was 18 for college and pretty much never went back. All my family left, my immediate family, so like my aunts, my grandparents, left the valley, I think in the 80s, and are now in Austin. But the valley is very much, I think you could call me like a diasporic member of the valley. I guess, because I've never lived there myself, but like when it came to writing Vampires of El Norte, well, it's kind of a long story, so I hope, shall I launch into it now?
Please do.
So I think it started to come from conversations I was actually having with my mother-in-law, who was going through a phase where she was super into genealogy, like really went down the rabbit hole of like tracing their family lineages, like their mayonnaise on white bread, super white, like Scottish, Welsh, English. And so like those people who have records and like kept those records really, really well. And so she could trace things back to like, the 18th century and like, well, this person did this job and this person was a weaver and such. And she wrote all these, she wrote up all this stuff about it to like compile for her future grandchildren and with like photos and cool little historical notes. And I was like, oh, this is such a fun exercise, like applauding. I'm a historian, so like this stuff gets me. I'm very nerdy about it, and I thought it was cool. And then she turned to me and she was like, I want to include you in this, of course. So like, where are your documents? And so my grandpa is from a town in Tamaulipas called Padilla, which was flooded in the 1960s when the government built a dam over the I think the river is called Purificación, and which is very biblical, and flooded the town. So the church where like all the documents are kept, like baptism records and stuff, is underwater. Oh, so wow. The cemetery where my great grandmother is buried is underwater, and so it's one of and he immigrated to the U.S. when he was 14 in the 40s, and my great-grandmother on the Cañas side of the family, she was also an orphan. She left during the revolution, and so I was left with this. My mother-in-law was looking for a specific kind of family history, and for that, my hands were empty, and it got me thinking. Like I was all up in my feelings about it. Yeah. It was a very weird feeling to look at like my family and think like, what do we have? And the answer is, of course, so much, but it can't be quantified in the same way that this genealogy vendor that my mother-in-law was on was looking for. And so when it came to my family's history, I lived in Southern California for a long time as a kid, and I've experienced like more xenophobia and like anti-Mexican sentiment in Southern California than any other place I've lived in the world. It was fun. And one question that got lobbed at me all the time, in good faith or in bad, was when did your family come to this country? And I didn't have an answer. I didn't have a clean and tidy answer. And because yeah, my grandfather immigrated at one point. My great grandmother did. But like, when it comes to the Cañas side of the family, it's like, well, they've been in the valley. Like, if you count it back, like minimum 5 generations, maybe 6, like that's as far back. Like, my mom was like, oh yeah, we have records to like, there's like some stories say like 1821, which is Mexican independence. Like, my family did not come to the United States. The United States came to us. And I when I realized that, it took this immense weight. It took this weight of the colonized narrative of my family history off of my shoulders, and there was suddenly this space that I was a little possessed to write into. I realized, like, this is the story of so many people in this country. A lot of people in the valley. This is their family history. It's like, yeah, we've been here. I have a friend who's from Arizona who's like, yeah, the United States came to us too, you know, in the 1840s. And so I kind of wanted to disrupt this narrative of like, when did your family come to this country? As if it were an empty space that people came to, which is of course a very fucked up notion.
Yeah.
And, also, I wanted to write into, I have pieces of my family history. I have stories from my grandparents that are very precious to me, and that that I have been even more faithful to, in terms of like exactly what they said, what the family stories are, what happened to these people in future works. For Vampires of El Norte, what I kind of wanted to do was imagine almost, I kind of think of it as like a speculative genealogy.
Yeah.
You know, the birth records and the marriage records, like, these things are underwater. These things went up in flames during the revolution. So like, what do I have? I have stories, and I have a place. And this place is immensely rich in folklore, in tall tales, in ghosts, in stories. And so I just started writing. And that's how Vampires of El Norte kind of came to be.
Yeah, I love that. I've kind of had that conversation. That's a journey that I've been on as well. This like idea that knowing your roots, knowing one's roots, is almost like a privilege, you know, because some of us don't have that. And I did the 23andMe, and I know that's kind of like a touchy subject for some people, but whatever. I gave my DNA to Amazon or something. So I did that. And the thing that I really enjoyed about that journey is that they're constantly updating it. That's my cat's tail, by the way. They're constantly updating that information as they get more. And so I've been able, when I initially did it, it was basically just like Mexico, right? But you know, there's so much more to that than just Mexico, right? And so they've been able to kind of narrow down my genealogy to a region in Oaxaca. And so I thought that was it was a huge discovery for me. And so this, you know, this conversation about like, you know, some of us have lost that kind of line or that trail to, I guess, like our history, which can inform so much, right? As you would know. Yeah, it's just a really, I think, it's a point that I really enjoyed that you brought up. With that being said, you touch on it a little bit, but I wanted to know if you could tell us about your journey as a writer and your experiences as a writer, especially living in different countries. You mentioned that you've lived in several places, and so could you maybe talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I began my journey writing as like an 11-year-old writing Lord of the Rings fan fiction, because
oh my God.
am an enormous nerd. I was homeschooled. We lived in Mexico City when I was learning how to read and write, so like kindergarten, that kind of age. And when we moved back to the US, I remember I don't remember actually having an accent, but I remember being very irritated that other people didn't like talk like me. And when they were reading in English in our second grade class. And my mom says it was for an intellectual experiment, but she took me and my sisters out of elementary school and homeschooled us. So I read voraciously. Like, do I have command of basic arithmetic? No. Do I understand? Did I ever take physics? No. Did I read absolute, like a madwoman? Absolutely, I did. And so my education, my older sister called it running barefoot through books. I read a lot of history. I read a lot of fantasy. And so that is where, once I started reading it and I realized that I was able to write, you could not stop me. The only thing that did stop me was when I was 17, I was in a writing workshop at Brown University. I had the opportunity to take like a summer class alongside college students, and I was, 17 and terrified and so excited. And the instructor, within the first few weeks, mocked me in front of the class for writing fantasy. And I was like, looking back, I'm like, you asshole, that's a child you're mocking.
Yeah.
Also, Brown is like known for its like, welcome. It's very welcoming towards slipstream and genre, and it's among MFA programs in the US. It's like among the more welcoming to genre fiction. So I was like, bro, what is going on? Anyway, wow. I stopped writing for a long time. I think it wasn't until my last year I journaled. I wrote very, very bad poetry, terrible poetry. It will never see the light of day. But I was always journaling when I was living abroad. And so I was always putting my feelings into words, and the feelings, that I had while living abroad very much informed who I am as a writer today, as you rightly guessed by asking me this question. I went to college in the United Kingdom. I was in Scotland for undergrad and for my master's. While I was an undergrad, I studied Arabic. So I lived abroad. I did my third year abroad in Cairo during 2011 and 2012, which is the Arab Spring. And I lived in Jordan. I lived in Turkey. Over the course of my 20s, I bounced around a lot. And one thing that I found very interesting and edifying in kind of a screwed up way was how in the US, and I mentioned earlier in Southern California in particular, people would be like, oh, you're Mexican. Where are you? Like, when did your family get here? What part of Mexico are they from? Blah, blah, blah. I had those conversations, all the time, and it became very normal. And suddenly when I was in the UK, and especially when I was in the Middle East, I was identified as other. And like, you're not like the other Americans. You're not like tall blonde from Connecticut. Like, explain this, explain yourself. And I suddenly was forced, like in many conversations, in many different contexts, to create a narrative for who I was and why I looked and sounded and spoke a certain way. Like when I was in the Middle East in particular, my friends and I, the friends I was studying abroad with were British and American. And when I lived in Turkey, the friends I was with were predominantly American. And I have a litany of experiences where people would say to me, like, oh, you're not like them. You're clearly Arab. Or no, you're definitely Turkish. So your dad, he's Arab, right? So your mom, she's Arab, right? And I was like, no, actually I'm Mexican. And they'd be like, no, that's not real. Like, you're more like us than you are like them. Explain it. It was so there was this constant, it was a daily conversation with myself, really trying to explain why I was different. Which I think is a very, I'm still trying to like work it out with myself, like what it means for me and my writing. But it is, when you're constantly asked to turn your experiences into a narrative, I think it probably prepared myself for the rigmarole that is traditional publishing, that is constantly demanding that BIPOC and otherwise marginalized writers perform their marginalizations in a specific way and fit a certain type of narrative. But what I think it drove home to me was it positioned like me vis-a-vis my history in such a way that I felt both distanced from it and closer to it. Like I don't know if you've read The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, but I read it when I was like in a tiny little freezing garret in Scotland, when I was very much at a very lonely part of my life, when I was in university, and it felt like coming home. And I felt so powerfully close to home, even though the woman who wrote this book is Chilean and she wrote it ages ago. And like, it's not the same as my family history, but there was something about the way that characters interacted with each other, the way that they brought stories to the table, and the way that they talked about their own past and their future, to me just felt so powerfully home that I think, Yeah. So I think with these experiences living abroad for me, what they drove home was like, yes, there are parts of the world and histories that I'm so interested in that are so far from home. Um, I have a PhD in medieval Islamic literature. I lived in Turkey and studied Turkish and studied the Ottomans, and I taught Islamic history. Like, that stuff brings me an enormous amount of nerdy joy. But whenever I was abroad, I was reminded so powerfully of how connected I was to back home, despite how my history has been erased or tried. Erasure is a very strong theme, I think, in my recent family history, or attempts at erasure and forced assimilation. Despite all of that, I can't change who I am. And these are the stories that I don't always want to write them, but I can't stop myself from writing them. I think sometimes writing from this raw place brings me, it forces me to be vulnerable. And as a Scorpio, I hate that. Do not perceive me. I don't want this, but I kind of have to. And yeah, I think on the flip side, it's really hard, but it allows me to connect to readers who, like you, read Vampires of El Norte, and it resonated with you. It's because I don't know.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so grateful for that. And I feel like so many other people are as well. I feel like this whole time I'm thinking, you're kind of like like the Dos Equis, most interesting man in the world. That's you. You are the most interesting author in the world. It's just like these many lives that you've lived, and it really provides such like a really unique and like interesting perspective that you put into your writing. I feel like I'm just going to be complimenting you this whole interview, because I am such an absolute fan. And just a heads up again for anybody who has not read your novels, The Hacienda or Vampires of El Norte, you absolutely need to check these out. You also have written a lot of short fiction. I saw you've done a lot of fantasy writing, a lot of sci-fi and horror. And so you have plenty of work out there in the world. And so I encourage everyone to go and seek out that work. And it makes me curious if there are any particular legends or stories that have left a lasting impression on you, maybe stories that you heard growing up. Is there one that is maybe your favorite, or it's always at the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently because I got asked this question I think like a year or two ago when I was doing the podcast Merry-Go-Round for the Hacienda, and immediately the thought that comes to mind is like La Llorona, because everybody, there's something about that story that cuts to the quick, that hits the bone. And now that I'm a mother, I think that is definitely a story that's going to come through in a particular way. I think in a few years, once that whole like, oh, I am recently a parent, has like kind of the raw edges of that have kind of healed up a little bit, and it feels like ready to re-excavate. But La Llorona definitely comes through. When it comes to the folklore that I was researching for Vampires of El Norte, I went to my grandmother and I was like, okay, I sat down at my grandparents' kitchen table and I was like, all right, lay it on me, guys. Like, what are the spooky stories that you grew up with? And I knew that I was going to be linking my monstrous vampires and Vampires of El Norte to the legend of El Cuco or El Cucuy. And I wanted them to be monstrous and boogeyman-like. And I was like, okay, did you guys ever hear anything about El Cuco when you were growing up? And my my grandmother said, yeah, we definitely heard those stories. They're pretty scary. My grandpa was like, oh yeah, of course we heard La Llorona stories. And my grandma said, but what my dad would tell us when he really wanted to scare us was, your mother will hear about this. And to me, it drove home like how the personalities in my family have absolutely shaped my fiction for sure, and shaped my understanding of the stories that are told about my family and what I have ended up with as a result. Other things I was really interested. One thing that's been interesting as I start to publish fiction that didn't come about when I was publishing more fantasy work I have some short stories that are more inspired by my research looking at popular medieval Islamic fiction stories. When it came to writing stories that were closer to home, and the Hacienda came out and my family members read it, or Vampires of El Norte came out and my family members read it, I was suddenly struck by how many conversations opened up where my aunts and uncles started sharing, I guess, not necessarily supernatural experiences, although there were some of those from my aunt. Amazing. Love the stories. But it just created a space where family members felt that they could share more with me. Mm-hmm. My grandma in particular, I remember having a conversation with her where she was telling me about her mom, who was orphaned by the Mexican Revolution, and the way she came to the US, and some of her family members. And she looked at me and she kind of cocked her head to the side and she said, I can tell you're writing this down in your head and you're going to use it for stories. And I was like, yeah. She said, you're welcome. She said, yeah, I was like, caught red-handed, ma'am. What can I say? And she said, you're welcome to them. They're yours. Which makes me want to cry.
I just got chills.
It's her last name. She was the one who told me to use her last name, Cañas, as my pen name when I got my agent way back in 2017. So I, lost my trail of thought. But there are a lot of, that when it comes, people always ask me about like the spooky stories, like, oh, did you grow up like, and of course I immediately said La Llorona because I love a good ghost story. Mm-hmm. I have a fascination with ghost stories and I'm terrified of them because I'm a massive weenie. But when it comes to the folklore that has been passed down to me, it's a lot more, it's subtle and it's very real in some ways. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes, when it comes to the kinds of stuff I want to write in the future, I worry that I'm just going to be pigeonholed as like a horror writer for forever because I have so many other ways of telling stories that I want to share with the world. Mm-hmm. And when you're of Latin American descent, everybody, of course, is like, oh, well, she writes magical realism. Like, the Hacienda is magical realism. I've seen so many things online that call it Hacienda magical realism, and it's not. It's gothic horror. Yeah. There's no magical thinking about it. But when I think about what I want to write in the future, I'm like, yeah, I think some magical realism is in the cards in the future because of what I have and what I want to share. What my family members have like given to me, and it's so cool that, you tell a ghost story and suddenly, because you've had the courage to tell that ghost story, other people come to you with more. Maybe you've experienced this telling,
absolutely
exactly what you do with Susto podcast. Like, do people come to you with more stories of like, I don't know. I feel like my family don't talk about stuff. They don't talk about the traumas they've experienced. They don't talk about the ghosts. They don't talk about, things until suddenly I tell the ghost story, and then they have stories about curanderas they met with my great grandmother, and I'm like, what? Where were these stories when I was 12? Like, they're just coming out now, and it's really precious.
Yeah, I love that, and that's something that I say a lot on the show too, or when I'm talking with people about these things. Is I say that for me, it's about, and it's an interesting way to connect with people, but it's about connecting with people on a level of fear. I don't know what it is about being scared that can be fun. It brings out, or it not brings out, but maybe it just like exposes this part of people. And when you see that in each other, you're like, okay, I get you now. I see you now. And like,
right.
And then that's how like the stories keep rolling. And then before you know it, it's 3 a.m. and you have to walk through the driveway of the rancho where your tia says she saw the devil.
Yeah. Freaky.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah, but it's true. I've definitely found that. I think I think horror has actually made me a better writer because it forces you to be vulnerable because otherwise it doesn't work. Otherwise it's like, okay, well, that's shock value. Okay, well, that's a little bit, it doesn't work unless you are super emotionally vulnerable. And it's that vulnerability that I think, when people see you being like, hello, I am without my shell, here are my guts, this is what I'm afraid of. Yeah. That's so powerful. And it's also so hard to do So I don't know. It's really cool.
That's kind of how I feel when I'm watching scary movies. I've gone on record and I've said this before. I don't know if it's a hot take. It might be, but I feel like I prefer the movies that, I don't even know how to explain it, but that are actually scary compared to like a jump scare. Like, I think jump scares are cheap. I don't think they're scares. They're surprises. And I don't like them.
I love that. I'm using that. I'm stealing that, Ayden. That is fantastic. I will credit you. No, that's brilliant. Because it's true. And when it comes to writing horror, you don't get those kinds of jump scares. And so you have to actually write what's scary.
Exactly. I also wanted to mention, I was thinking about it right now while you're speaking. You mentioned again in the author's notes, and I'm referencing Vampires of the Norte because I've read both of your novels, but I've read this one more recently. And you also mentioned in the author's notes the idea of the Tlahuelpuchi, which I was so excited to see because it's a story. The story of the Tlahuelpuchi is one that I tell at a lot of live events, and it's one of my like go-to episodes just because it's so the actual lore, and I'm sure you know, like the real story behind it is so troubling. And so I was really excited when I saw that you mentioned it because I was like, oh, somebody else knows about it and they're spreading the word like good. I'm curious about your thoughts on the story of the Tlahuelpuchi.
Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to say this at the beginning. I so admire how well researched your episodes are. I was recently listening to your episode about La Santa Muerte, and my little historian's heart was a pitter because I was just like, this is so well done.
Oh my God, thank you.
I love it. So when it comes to Tlahuelpuchis, I was reading about sorcery in my research for the Hacienda because, spoiler alert, it is on the back cover copy. The Hacienda has a witch in it. And he blends, he is of mixed heritage, and as is his magic. And so I was doing research on sorcery in central Mexico, and I came across this book written by some stuffy British anthropologist called Blood-Sucking Witches.
Way I have been searching for that book high and low.
Do you have it? Do you not? I have the PDF. I'll email it to you. I'm writing this down right now. I
really want the physical copy too. I don't know. I'm a physical book kind of person. I will take the PDF for sure, but I'm also like hunting for a copy of that book. It's so hard to find.
It is so difficult to find. Actually, I find a lot of like out of print used academic books on biblio.com. Sponsor me biblio.com. I find so many of my books there, but I'll send you the PDF. But I agree. It's very dense, and so it's really difficult to read on a screen. I myself am also a physical books girly, but I got it and I was reading it, and that's where I came across this anthropologist was writing about, I think it's in Tlaxcala, they were, there was this air quotes plague of blood-sucking witches or Tlahuelpuchis. And I think that there were other things that the anthropologist talked about in the book. There were like different kinds of sorcery, nahuales, like all sorts of stuff. It's a good read. Lots of footnotes, very dense, which is my jam. I love that kind of stuff. But I was just struck by how much there was to pick apart when it came to the Tlahuelpuchis. And I felt when I was putting this book together, that was in the very beginning, that was the inspiration. Because I thought these young women had, as I understood it from the folklore that I was reading and this text that I was reading, like literally in 2001, and I've since like moved across the country, had a baby, lost 30% of my brain in the process. So as I remember it, please correct me.
And completed your PhD.
And
Let us
completed
not
my
forget.
PhD, which took its pound of mental flesh. Thank you very much.
I'm sure.
It was my understanding that Tlahuelpuchis, unlike the Western European conception of the vampire, where it was, Dracula is like, I want to suck your blood, and he'll like bite you, and then you'll turn, and it has that infectious quality. The Tlahuelpuchis were born, and it manifested when they hit puberty. And in the text I was reading, there were only women, and so I thought, I think there was a lot to unpack there in terms of and they particularly were interested in the blood of babies. More than anyone else. So they're not like running around attacking full-grown men. They were sucking the blood out of babies. So there's so much to unpack there, I think, in terms of ways you could retell this tale. And now that I'm a mother, I think I can have a good whack at it. I think I can give it justice. But when it came to Vampires of El Norte, there's so much to unpack in terms of gender, in terms of like your consent in becoming a creature like this, what it means to be a monster, the way that they hid themselves in villages and kind of tried to fly under the radar, but then babies would start dying and they would get hunted out, stuff like that. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
And there are many layers. And when I was putting together Vampires of El Norte, I was juggling too many balls because I had the Mexican-American War. I had this particular vampiric legend. I wanted to tell a romance because I love telling stories that have romance. My mom jokes that my brand is Spookies and Smoochies. I would have
So
it no
cute.
other way. And
Oh
I was, and Nana and Nestor are both very large personalities with their own personal histories. And I was juggling and juggling and juggling. And I realized that something had to give. And so when it came to, I also had like, at first, I think in the very early draft, Nana had some kind of magical powers. So the book was even more speculative, more fantasy adjacent than it ended up being in the end. So I had to axe a lot. And one of those things was the Tlahuelpuchis themselves, unfortunately, because I thought, this isn't the book for them. They deserve their own book. And I believe there are writers out there who are doing that. I think David Bowles is doing a book that is inspired by Tlahuelpuchis. And I am so excited for that and any other writer who picks up this legend. But I also want to have a stab at it, sink my teeth into it. But I'm bummed.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's something that it's a conversation I have a lot with people. Is I'm like, it doesn't matter if somebody else is doing it, you're going to bring your own perspective to it, your own unique take. So just do it either way. There's room for all of us. People can read more than one book.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that particularly plagues marginalized writers, because there is a sense in traditional publishing that you are the token fill in the blank writer. You are the token Mexican writer. And there can be no one else. Like, publishing will not stick its neck out for anyone else. So when Mexican Gothic came out in 2020, my book, The Hacienda, was about to go on submission to editors. And my heart sank because I thought, I was so excited for this book because it was exactly what I wanted to read. But I thought, oh no, they have their Mexican book already about the haunted house. They're not going to want mine. Fortunately, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. Publishing has discovered that there is an audience for these. I mean, there is an audience for these kinds of stories, but they've seen, like, God bless Santa Silvia Moreno Garcia, because she showed publishing that they can make a tidy buck over these kinds of stories. And so they're more willing to stick their necks out. The powers that be in the publishing ivory towers in New York City are more willing to stick their necks out and take chances on stories like The Hacienda and other ones that are coming up. One of my friends just told me that she sold, and she's a Latin American writer, she sold her horror novel, and I was like, yes!
That's awesome.
Give me more! There's so much
people
space.
Want it. Absolutely. People want it. People are hungry for it. So, I mean, and I'm excited to hear that as well. I'm always looking for these kind of stories. So yeah, I'm so glad that you did not let that doubt get in the way and that you went for it. And to anybody else that might be hearing this, heed these words. Go for it. There is a market. There is an
100% of the shots you don't take. There's an audience. There's a market. And traditional publishing is a lot. But they're listening. They're listening to us. So
absolutely.
Make yourself heard.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
Another one. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? But a very special question. I want to know if you have your own personal experiences with the paranormal.
So, yeah, I have a lot of adjacent experiences, and one that, well, it's not entirely my own story to tell. So I'm going to give you like the Cliff Notes version, if you
Okay.
will. I have often been asked in interviews, like, why are you drawn to ghost stories? Why are you drawn to these, like, this mode of storytelling, this tone in storytelling? And I didn't have an answer except for the fact that I love it. Since I was young, I've always been deliciously terrified by ghost stories. I am not the kind of, I think there are two kinds of horror writers. In my head, I call them edgelords and weenies. The edgelord writers, really enjoy slasher films and like consume all kinds of horror content and are there for the gore and there for the violence and there for the ghost stories and things that keep them up at night. And then there are those of us who have really active imaginations who are scared shitless by this stuff, but can't stay away.
Yeah.
And I count myself in that party. I am a weenie horror writer. I feel like a fraud sometimes because who am I to be talking about horror fiction when honestly, like anything, like I struggle to watch scary movies because it just scares me so much. So anyway, ghost stories. I didn't have an answer for why I was drawn to this kind of thing, except for the fact that once you have a taste of that kind of fear, you keep coming back to it. It's, I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's incredible the kind of high almost you get from connecting to people and other stories this way. It's unlike anything else other genres have to offer, I think, in terms of media. But on a more personal level, with the Hacienda, I spoke a lot about how one of the houses I lived in when I was a kid was haunted, and my aunt had an experience in the house. But even before then, I had a daughter recently, and kind of like how my book babies, their births opened up new conversations with family members. Having an actual real life child opened up a number of conversations with family members that I haven't had before. And I had a conversation with my mom about the night I was born, and my mom experienced an enormous amount of trauma when she was pregnant with me and lost someone very, very close to her. And so I think all I'll say is the night I was born, or the 6 a.m., the morning I was born, there was presence in the room.
Wow.
And so that was my entry into the world. And it was a welcome one, a happy one. So I don't know why I'm so drawn to why the fear side of experiences that we can explain like that. But this house that I lived in when I was about 6 years old, and then we moved to Mexico City, moved back, so 8, 9, 10 years old. I had a basement that was very, very dark and very, very sketchy. And my aunt came to stay with us to help my mom look after us because then we were 4, but I'm one of 5. So there's a lot of looking after to do. And she was asleep in my sister's bedroom, and she felt somebody bending over her, when you're kind of sort of awake and you kind of feel just someone's there. So you wake up a little bit. And she thought it was my mom. And it was a woman in a green dress with her hair pulled tight back in a shingon, who just then stood up and then vanished. And yeah. And when my aunt told me this, I was like, I knew that house was haunted. I knew it. I knew it.
God.
Because, that house had vibes. And when my parents were, it was the 90s. They believed in timeouts in the basement.
Oh my God.
Or my dad rather was, if we were really naughty, which I often was because I've always said what I think, which is, it gets you into trouble sometimes. I spent a lot of time at the bottom of the basement stairs in timeout, in the dark, just, staring at the darkness.
But
and
at least you
thinking
weren't
about-
alone.
At least, yeah, thanks. Oh my God. Yeah, I was not alone. I was not alone down there. Yeah, so those are my two. I've lived in houses that have, I lived in a number of houses when I was growing up. We moved every 4 years, not because I'm a military brat or anything, but just because my parents, they just kind of had itchy feet. We're always on the move. And for my dad's job, for family stuff, whatever. And I lived in, I think, 9 houses between when I was born and when I went away to university. And when I went away to university, I lived in a lot of very old buildings in the United Kingdom. And, beneath all those layers of paint and wallpaper, there's layers of other stuff too.
Yeah.
So I've never had like a experience like my aunt's in that one house where I've seen someone or something, but I've felt vibes, for lack of a better term. And I think, it's sometimes weird to talk about with people because you think with you, for example, I feel really comfortable sharing this stuff because like this is, you've shared stuff on the podcast in terms of like, this is your whole shtick. And so because you talk about these things, I want to talk about them too. It goes back to what I was saying before. But like, my sisters and I have talked about it a little bit. But like when I think about when my husband and I, for example, are going to go look at a potential house that's for sale in a nearby neighborhood. And I know if I walk in and I get the bad vibes, we're out. No question. When we were house hunting, when we first moved to Seattle, last year, I walked into one house and I was like, nope, hard no. And he was so frustrated because he couldn't sense it. I tried to explain it and I can't explain it.
Yeah. You have to trust that intuition.
You do. And that intuition led me to the house we live in now, which I adore. So yeah.
Yeah. So you're welcome, husband.
Yeah, I point that out often. I had a meltdown, Ayden, and I say you're welcome for that meltdown to him all the time. Whenever he's like, I love this bit about our house. I'm like, you're welcome, sir. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. How did we get here, huh?
It was because we listened to me.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. So I want to ask, and kind of, we both do different things, but also maybe similar in some ways, but the role of like storytelling and folklore, what kind of role do you think that plays in preserving and transmitting culture?
I think it's huge. I think it's really huge. It's so important because, those are our documents. When I was doing my PhD, my dissertation was about a particular story that before it was written down on paper in the 1360s, was orally transmitted. It was a bunch of stories that were very similar to like King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. So popular, kind of the equivalent of soap opera-y, Game of Thrones, like genre, that kind of like feel of story. And when it was put down on paper by a particular guy in the 14th century, that's when it was like committed to history. And that's how I, hundreds of years later, was able to read it in 14th century Turkish, which took a lot of homework.
Yeah.
But when I was thinking about that, I thought a lot about how much was preserved by the oral transmission and how much was lost by the oral transmission and how much we can't know. I, as a historian, am only left with what's written down on the page. And you can feel when you read the text, you can actually feel the texture of the orality behind it, in the cadence, in the words that are chosen. I'm gonna slow my roll here so I don't get too nerdy about it. But I was finishing my dissertation on this text at the same time that I was writing Vampires of El Norte, and I think that the two are. They're not twins, they're sisters, like your eyebrows. And they definitely have that. I was bringing that same brain to both works because when I think of the oral transmission that has occurred in my family, It's like maybe it's because of who I am as a writer, maybe it's because of who I am as a historian, but I'm desperate to write it down so that it is not lost. But oral transmission and storytelling has done so much legwork to preserve a culture that American imperialism and colonialism has done its darndest to try and erase. And it's an act of resistance, I think, telling these stories. It's a very powerful act when you think about it. Even if they're dumb stories, like even if it's really quiet personal stories, it's very special, and I think it's really important. And when I was researching Vampires of El Norte, in addition to like chatting with my grandparents and listening to what my mom and her sisters had to say about growing up in the Valley, I also read a lot of folklore research. There are a lot of folklorists at UT Austin, at other universities, who were writing things down in the 30s and 40s. And there's one named Jovita Gonzalez who wrote, I mentioned a bunch of her books in the author's note. She was hugely inspirational. So she was a folklorist. So she grew up in the Valley, and in South Texas. I don't know in the Valley in particular, but definitely South Texas, and on a rancho. And she went around collecting these orally transmitted stories, and she put them down on paper. And they're incredible. They're so great. Like, they're ghost stories, they're monster stories, they're stories about the devil on horseback, and he's like this dashing, like, not a caballero, he's like this dashing type on horseback, charro on horseback, in like a black suit and the black boots, the black hat. And I'm like, yes, this is delicious, give me more. She preserved that, and that is exactly what colonists coming to Texas wanted to get rid of. She was not allowed to teach certain topics. Like, my grandma would talk about how in the 50s in the Valley, there were certain things you could, air quotes, couldn't talk about. The culture of silencing was very pervasive. And when my mom was growing up in the 60s, there was, I don't know if your family experienced this too, but there was a very strong belief in her family that they could not speak English with an accent. And so they spoke no Spanish at all. My grandparents spoke no Spanish at all directly to my mom and aunts and uncles. So the erasure was attempted. It was done. I think like the language stuff in particular, like what was the end goal of it? To make sure that my mom and her siblings had a better life. I am that better life, and I'm ready to fix this shit,
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm going to grab my microphone because I'm trying so hard to not scream right now, because it's just everything you're saying. I'm like, yes. Oh my God. Like, speaking of like just this conversation, it makes me think of, I'm from a really small town called Elsa. It's part of Edcalchelsa in the Rio Grande Valley. And this idea of like the way the stories that they were not allowed to tell, even down to how they were not allowed to tell them, the language thing. Like growing up when my mom was in school, or my grandmother, she wasn't allowed. It was frowned upon to speak Spanish. They would get in trouble. So growing up, I am a No Sabo kid, and I'm trying really hard to reverse that. But because the idea was, our kids are going to have a better life if they speak English fluently and well, and if they're articulate. And so, that's why that kind of like value was, or quote unquote value, was instilled in us. But also makes me think of, and the reason I mentioned Edcalchelsa is because I think it was 1968, a student at Edcalchelsa High School staged a walkout, and it went down in history as a really important event to protest the discrimination that the Mexican American students were facing at the high school. Several of them were suspended, and I always forget if it was it La Jolla? Yes, it was. Okay, my boyfriend gave me the thumbs up. It was that La Jolla ISD, also in the Rio Grande Valley, was the only school district in the valley that accepted the suspended students from Edcalchelsa. So in my heart, there's always
so recent.
Yeah, 1968. But yeah, in my heart, there is an Ecauchosa La Jolla solidarity that I'm always so like grateful for. But yeah, this conversation, even down to how these stories are told and what language they are told. And yeah, this idea of what is preserved or lost by way of oral storytelling, it's kind of an idea that I'm also trying to tackle with Susto, is continuing that tradition of oral storytelling, but documenting it. You know, I'm able to now document it in a digital space, and also to open it up to conversation, because I mean, I'm just part of this tradition. You know, I'm not the end all be all. My word is not final by any means on these stories. So yeah, I just wanted to have this conversation with you about preserving culture, because you do such a beautiful job of it in your books and in your writing.
Thank you. No, I think what you're doing is immense, and it's resistance, and it's powerful. So keep fighting the good fight.
Yes, absolutely. So we're nearing the end. I have just a couple more questions. You've covered greed and malevolent hauntings in La Hacienda, and a complex love story in Vampires of El Norte. Are there any specific topics or aspects of folklore that you feel eager to dive into with upcoming projects that you can reveal to us?
Honey, when you sent me this question, I was like, yes, I have so much. I have so much. So I have, I was raised very conservative Catholic. My dad is an Opus Dei, which is a very right-wing branch of the Catholic Church, or sect, cult, if you will. It's a product of fascist Spain, and boy, does it act like it.
Yep.
And so I ran away so far and so fast from everything Catholic when I became a young adult, and I just find myself writing my way back to it because it's in my DNA, whether I like it or not. So one topic I really want to tackle is, one thing I keep finding myself drawn to is folk saints. La Santa Muerte is really interesting to me. I am really interested in demonic possession. Terrifies me. Scares my little socks off. And so I obviously have to write about it. If the Hacienda didn't get me the religious intervention from my father, then maybe this book will. So I'm definitely playing with that. I am also drawn to more subtle witchcraft, if you will. After the Hacienda came out, and after Vampires of El Norte came out, and I started having more conversations with my mom's siblings, I think they've shared a lot of stuff with me that makes me think I need to write a witchcraft book for sure. One that is more informed by subtle. I hesitate to use the word real, because what is real? And what is speculative? I think that line gets very blurred in some cases, but I definitely want to play in that blur in terms. And I do want to come back to Tlahuelpuchis. There is a book by a guy, a folklorist as well, called Americo Paredes. It's called Folktales of Mexico. I was able to find the copy on biblio.com. It's out of print. It's very old, but it is full of really great ghost stories and vaquero tall tales and monsters. And there are a few monsters in there I want to play with. I really am drawn to tales of the devil. I think the devil as personified as this charro in black, and he's very dashing and stuff. I think that draws me. So when it comes to my future work, I want to be 6 different writers at once. With my short fiction, you mentioned I'm all over the map in terms of genre. There's fantasy, there's science fiction, there's horror. I'm yes, I am all over the map. I want to be all of these writers at once. And no matter what I do, I keep getting yanked back to this particular kind of space, that Vampires of El Norte is set in, that the Hacienda is set in, that I think the Vampires of El Norte universe, if you will, that space, that folkloric tone almost is it just won't let go of me.
Yeah.
So I think whether I like it or not, I'm going to end up writing more stuff like that.
Well, I mean, I certainly can only hope so. And I know there will be other people out there that will agree with me. I mean, I also do hope that you get to, you know, write what you want to write. And you can span across any genre you want to. But I definitely enjoy this part of your work.
Thank you.
And on a final note, for any maybe writers or creators listening, do you have any advice for people who are interested in exploring their own cultural heritage and their creative work?
Yeah, I struggled with this a lot. I think because I'd received the implicit message that the stories I had to tell were not, air quotes, good enough.
Hmm.
You are enough, is what I have to say. And the stories you have to tell are enough, and they're yours, and there is no one else who can tell them. We need them. So I hope that any writers out there listening who are struggling to, you know, if you want to write about other things, do it. Like, I wrote fantasy for years before I had the courage, if you will, to turn back and start to write about this. I hope younger writers especially have had more therapy than me and are able to turn back and delve into these topics sooner. I don't think any word you write is wasted. I think every paragraph, every sentence is a step towards better writing, is a step towards braver writing. But whenever you're ready, little writer, like, please tell us the stories. We need them, and they are acts of resistance.
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your words, both today and written.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you liked, like, I cannot tell you, Ayden, how afraid I was to publish Vampires of El Norte, because when it comes to second books in particular, I was so overjoyed that the Hacienda found its readership and that readers were really excited about it. And I was worried that Vampires of El Norte would be a disappointment because it's different. You know, it's a different book. It's a different vibe. And I've never been happier to be so wrong.
Well, let me just tell you, the Hacienda I read on the Kindle, and Vampires of the Norte I have the physical copy. Your books are the only books that I've ever done this with. If you're watching on Patreon, you're seeing I have tabs all throughout the book. I've never done this with other books. So
you're seeing my absolute sheer delight. I'm so honored. As an academic, like, there's no greater compliment.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know when I will go through these. Maybe if for like bonus content in the future, I'll go through all of my tabs for people who have read the book with me. But yeah, it's just, I cannot recommend your writing enough to the people out there. And can you share with people where they can find you online if they're looking?
Yeah. So social media is a bit of a trash fire at the moment. I can be periodically found haunting Instagram at Isabel Cañas _. So ISABELCANAS _. I am occasionally chaotic on Threads. Who knows how long that platform in particular is going to last.
Yeah.
The place I always am and will always be is my newsletter, buttondown.email/Isabel Cañas. The link to it is on my website.
And it will be in the description of this episode.
Yep, isabelcañas.com. That is where I'm at. So I think my newsletter is that's where the latest updates happen. I've recently started sharing like snippets of my writing, short stories, future projects, of which I have several, baking in the oven right now. So yeah, isabelcañas.com. That's where you'll find links to everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And do you have a couple minutes for some Patreon questions?
I do.
All right. Well, if you are listening to this right now, this next section will only be available via patreon.com/Susto podcast for best school friends. You can also watch this entire episode on video. These are our faces. And so we're going to go ahead and get into those. Welcome back, Ghoul friends. Thank you once more for listening. And wasn't Isabel just amazing? I had so much fun. Again, it was just like hanging out with a friend. We talked a little bit after recording, and I was like, we're basically besties now. We will be, next time you're in Austin, hanging out and just talking all things spooky and nerdy and history. So excited to have had her on. It was such an honor. And again, if you have not read her books or any of her short writing, I highly recommend that you go and seek that out. Again, all the links to follow her are in the description of this Patreon post with the video or the episode, wherever you're listening or watching. You already know about sending in your own stuff, about interacting with the show, about leaving the ratings and the reviews. It's the easiest way to support the show. But also, if you are a Patreon member on patreon.com/Susto Podcast, then you have the opportunity to also watch this episode. Along with that, there was some bonus content. We did some extra questions and a fun kind of like writing exercise, if you will, for the Best Ghoul Friends Patreon. So again, thank you, Isabel, for your time. And thank you, listener, for your time dropping by and listening. Ghoul friends, I forgot to record the Patreon shout out on the video version of this for Best Ghoul Friends. So Best Ghoul Friends, I'm so very sorry, but I hope you'll be distracted by the flashiness of a video and the bonus content of this episode. But for everybody else, and of course, including the Best Ghoul Friends on the audio version only of the episode, I want to give a huge shout out to all of this episode's patrons. You already know your support means the world to me. And you are Liza, Sadie, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April, Mario, Eva, D, Victoria, Josette, Angela and Co, Mandy, Jules, Lori, Jeannie, Desiree A, Anna C, Ashes, Neresa, Rachel, Azucena, Rios, Anna, Marlene, Chata, Lainey, Desiree C, Aaliyah, Holly, and Cynthia. Thank you all so much. I will talk to you all in the next one. And until then, visit your local library and check out a book, preferably one by Isabel Cañas. Bye.